They didn't break in through the front door they flew in, tunneled under, or vanished with millions. These are history's boldest heists. It sounds like something straight out of Money Heist, but this one actually happened, and no red jumpsuits were involved. In 2009, Stockholm woke up to what would become one of the boldest and most bizarre robberies in European history. A group of masked men hijacked a helicopter, flew it straight onto the secure rooftop of a cash depot in the quiet suburb of Västberga, and vanished with close to 1 billion Swedish kroner in just 20 minutes. This wasn't a rushed job. It was cold, calculated, and clockwork precise. The gang stole a Bell 206 Jet Ranger helicopter and landed it directly on the roof of the G4S cash handling facility just before sunrise. The building was protected from every angle except above. Inside, the crew smashed through reinforced doors and vaults using sledgehammers and explosives. Alarms went off, but that didn't matter. They were moving fast, knowing exactly what they came for. To keep police away, the robbers placed spike strips on key roads and even planted fake bombs at the police helicopter base, effectively grounding the country's aerial response. That's not just clever, that's surgical. People living nearby saw the helicopter and assumed it was part of some routine operation. No one panicked. No one realized they were witnessing one of the most daring crimes in Scandinavian history. The gang was surgical in their choice of loot, targeting untraceable bills. Surveillance footage showed masked figures moving with precision and speed. By the time police arrived, the robbers were long gone. The helicopter? Found later in the woods, abandoned and scrubbed clean. A few suspects were caught, but the vast majority of the money gone. And here's the part that makes it feel like a Hollywood script. Some of the robbers had actually taken flight lessons in the months leading up to the heist. These weren't pros, these were people who studied for it like they were prepping for the ultimate real-life video game mission. The Västberga robbery didn't just shock Sweden, it became a legend. No guns fired, no guards harmed. Just a helicopter, a rooftop, and nearly 1 billion kroner that seemed to vanish into thin air. A tunnel, a fake company, and over 160 feet of underground genius. This wasn't a bank robbery, this was an engineering project. In 2005, a group of thieves in Fortaleza, Brazil, pulled off a heist so absurdly clever it still sounds like a Netflix pitch. Over the course of 3 months, they dug a tunnel from a rented house straight into the Banco Central's vault and walked out with more than $70 million in cash. Here's how they did it. The gang rented a small building 2 blocks away from the bank, pretending it was a landscaping business. The whole time, they were quietly digging beneath the streets, reinforcing their tunnel with wood beams, plastic, and lighting. They even installed ventilation. This was a full-on underground operation and nobody noticed a thing. When they broke into the vault, they didn't need to deal with alarms. The part of the vault they entered had no sensors because it was underneath the main floor. Once inside, they removed more than 3 tons of unmarked Brazilian real banknotes, all used bills, with no electronic trace. They carried it out in bags through their tunnel and vanished. By the time the authorities figured out what happened, the gang was long gone. No getaway cars, no alarms, just an empty vault and a hole in the ground. Investigators called it one of the most professional and disciplined crimes they'd ever seen. Several members of the group were eventually caught, but a large chunk of the money has never been found. Some of it may still be buried. Some may have traveled across continents. What's certain is this: these weren't just robbers, they were architects of the perfect underground escape. When London police got the call that a vault had been hit in Hatton Garden, they were expecting a crew of high-tech, high-speed modern criminals. Instead, they found a gang of senior citizens, retired thieves who came out of hiding for one last score. Over the Easter weekend in 2015, these men drilled into a vault and pulled off what many now call the last great British heist. The crew included men in their 60s and 70s. Their leader, nicknamed Basil, had keys to the front door. They bypassed alarms, climbed down an elevator shaft, and used an industrial drill to bore through 2 feet of reinforced concrete. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it worked. They looted over $14 million worth of cash, gold, and jewelry from safety deposit boxes, leaving behind piles of shattered metal and dust. Some boxes were ripped open. Others were emptied with surgical care. The vault looked like it had been hit by a tornado with a pension plan. What shocked the public wasn't just how bold the crime was, it was who did it. These were old-school thieves, some with long criminal histories. One had a pacemaker, another had arthritis. But they planned this job like it was the 1980s all over again, and for a while they got away with it. Eventually, most of them were caught. But the mystery still remains. Who exactly was Basil, the man who got them in? His identity wasn't confirmed for years, and much of the stolen loot never recovered. The Hatton Garden job wasn't just a robbery, it was a comeback. A reminder that sometimes the most unpredictable crew isn't young, wild, or reckless. It's a group of calm, gray-haired professionals who've seen it all and still have a few tricks left. No masks, no tunnels, no weapons. Just a keyboard, spreadsheets, and a single employee who brought one of Europe's biggest banks to its knees. In 2008, Société Générale, one of France's largest financial institutions, revealed it had lost nearly $7 billion through unauthorized trading. And the man behind it all? A low-profile employee named Jérôme Kerviel. He wasn't a high-flying executive or tech genius. He was a mid-level trader working quietly behind the scenes. What made this case so unbelievable is how far he went without anyone noticing. Kerviel placed massive bets on the market, bypassing risk controls by creating fake offsetting trades. On paper, everything balanced. In reality, he was gambling with billions. For years, he flew under the radar. And when the market went his way, the profits rolled in, making him look like a rising star. But when the global financial system started to shake, everything unraveled. The bank had no idea how exposed it was until it was too late. Société Générale scrambled to unwind the positions, losing billions in just a few days. Kerviel was arrested and sentenced, but even today, some still debate whether he was acting alone or just the fall guy for a much bigger system failure. What makes this story so wild isn't just the number, though $7 billion is jaw-dropping. It's how it happened. No break-in, no hacking, just one man sitting in an office, typing away and unknowingly triggering one of the biggest financial disasters of the 21st century. He was smart, quiet, and looked like any other guy walking down the street. But for more than 30 years, Carl Gugasian was the FBI's most elusive bank robber. He didn't smash windows or yell threats. He planned every move like a military operation and always struck on Friday nights, right before closing time. Gugasian wasn't just clever. He was methodical. He studied banks for months, sometimes longer, watching employee routines, security patterns, even getaway routes. He'd hide weapons and clothes in the woods ahead of time, often digging them into the ground near escape paths. When the time came, he'd burst in wearing a Halloween-style mask, armed, and move with military precision. He hit banks in small towns across multiple states. Never too much, never too flashy. He was in and out in minutes. The FBI had no idea who he was. All they had were vague witness reports and blurry cameras showing a masked figure who vanished into the night. What finally got him caught? A careless move. While stashing supplies in a wooded area, a hunter stumbled across his hidden duffel bag full of notes, weapons, and maps. That led investigators to a storage unit and eventually to Carl Gugasian. Turns out he had a doctorate. He'd studied statistics. He used his knowledge to pick the safest targets, fastest routes, and even minimize how much he stole to avoid major headlines. Over 3 decades, he hit over 50 banks and got away with millions. Carl wasn't just a bank robber. He was a one-man operation with the patience of a scientist and the discipline of a soldier. And for years, no one even knew his name. No alarms, no broken glass, not even a single loud noise. In 2003, a crew of skilled thieves pulled off one of the most unbelievable thefts in history, sneaking into the Antwerp Diamond Center in Belgium and vanishing with more than $100 million worth of diamonds, gold, and jewelry. And they did it so quietly that no one even knew it happened until the building opened for business the next morning. The job was led by Leonardo Notarbartolo, an Italian thief who had rented an office inside the building under a fake name. He used it to gain regular access, walk the halls, and even store tools without suspicion. Over months, the crew studied every detail of the security system: infrared sensors, magnetic locks, motion detectors, and a steel vault door that looked impenetrable. And then, over a weekend, they made their move. They disabled every single system using aluminum to blind heat sensors, a spray to block magnetic fields, and a simple plastic shield to fool the security camera. Inside, they drilled through the vault's lock system and opened 123 of the 160 safety deposit boxes, selecting only the most valuable ones. They left the rest untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing broken. Even the vault door was found locked on Monday morning. The police were baffled. It took them hours to figure out how anyone could have even gotten inside, and by that time, the diamonds were already gone. The wildest part? Some of the stolen loot was never insured or registered, meaning even today it's impossible to know exactly what disappeared. The gang left almost no evidence except for one tiny mistake: a discarded sandwich. Police traced DNA from a half-eaten salami sandwich found near the scene, which eventually led to arrests. Notarbartolo was caught and served time, but the diamonds? Most were never recovered. Many believe they were quietly sold off over time, vanishing into private collections and black markets around the world. The Antwerp diamond heist remains a masterclass in patience, planning, and precision, a theft so silent it took the world nearly 24 hours to even realize it had happened. No weapons drawn, no alarms tripped, just confidence, timing, and the ability to act like they belonged. In 1987, in the heart of London's upscale Knightsbridge district, a charismatic Italian named Valerio Vice pulled off a robbery so slick it stunned the UK. He and his crew made off with the contents of safety deposit boxes worth over $60 million, including gold, jewelry, and stacks of cash, the kind of score that still ranks among the largest in British history. Here's how it went down. Vici entered the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center dressed like a wealthy client. He asked to rent a box, showed ID, filled out paperwork, and was escorted to the vault like any other customer. But once inside, he pulled out a gun, overpowered the staff, and let in two accomplices who were waiting outside. Then came the lockdown. They closed the vault, hung a temporarily closed sign on the door, and started looting the boxes one by one. With hours of uninterrupted access, they broke open dozens of containers filled with everything from antique watches to diamonds and bearer bonds. It wasn't chaos, it was systematic. The robbers knew exactly what to go for. When they were done, they vanished without a trace. No alarms had been triggered. No one had even realized a robbery had happened until much later. The vault door was closed, the cameras had been cleverly avoided, and the staff were left tied up but unharmed. What makes this robbery so outrageous isn't just the money, it's how simple and clean the plan was. No explosions, no underground tunnels, just charm, fake paperwork, and enough confidence to walk through the front door of a high-security vault like they owned it. Vicky eventually fled to South America but couldn't resist returning to the UK for his Ferrari. That decision cost him his freedom. He was arrested, convicted, and later died during a failed prison escape attempt. But the loot? Most of it was never found. Many believe it was quickly moved through international black markets. To this day, the Knightsbridge job stands as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thieves don't sneak in. They smile, shake your hand, and walk right past the security desk. It was cold, quiet, and perfectly timed. In January 1950, a group of 11 men pulled off what newspapers instantly dubbed the crime of the century. They hit the Brinks Security Depot in Boston and walked away with $2.7 million in cash, checks, and bonds, the biggest robbery the United States had ever seen at the time. The crew spent months planning every detail. They knew the guards' routines, had duplicate keys, and even practiced dry runs with military discipline. When the moment came, they wore rubber masks, Navy-style coats, and gloves to avoid fingerprints. They stormed the vault just after closing time, tied up the guards without a fight, and cleared out the bags of money in under 30 minutes. Everything about the robbery screamed precision. No shouting, no mistakes, and no evidence left behind. The vault had been entered without triggering any alarms. The getaway truck vanished into the night, and the city was left stunned. For years, the FBI had nothing, no names, no suspects, no leads that stuck. The one thing the gang didn't plan for? Greed. They agreed to wait 6 years before spending any serious money, knowing the statute of limitations on robbery was 6 years. But as time passed, paranoia grew. Arguments started, and eventually one member cracked and turned on the rest just 5 days before the clock ran out. 8 of the robbers were convicted. 2 escaped justice entirely. And the money? Only a fraction of it was ever recovered. The rest may still be out there hidden in walls, buried or long spent. The Brinks job wasn't flashy, but it was smart, quiet, and bold enough to make history. Right in the middle of Christmas week, while people were wrapping presents and office parties, were winding down, a group of masked men pulled off one of the most dramatic heists in UK history. They stole $50 million from the Northern Bank headquarters in Belfast. And the way they did it? Straight up psychological warfare. The robbers didn't burst in with guns. Instead, they went after 2 senior bank employees at their homes. Over the course of one long, terrifying night, the staff and their families were held under watch, while the employees were instructed to show up for work the next morning like everything was normal. Once inside the bank, they followed the robbers' instructions, giving them access to the vault. The crew moved fast, filling bags with unmarked fresh bills, most of them never even entered circulation. Then they walked out the door with the money, no alarms raised, no panic triggered. The timing was perfect. With holidays slowing down police response and most of the city distracted, the robbers disappeared into the night. By the time authorities understood what had happened, they were long gone. The scale of the heist and the cold strategy behind it shocked the country. Investigators found some of the money later, but the majority never recovered. No one was ever officially convicted for planning it, and suspicions still linger about who was really behind it. What makes this robbery unforgettable isn't just the amount, it's the chilling calm with which it was executed. It wasn't a smash and grab, it was a chess move. One that made the Northern Bank job a holiday story nobody forgets in Northern Ireland. In the early hours of an ordinary August morning in 1963, a gang of 15 men stopped a Royal Mail train headed from Glasgow to London. What they did next would go down in history. They hijacked the train and stole $2.6 million in cash, worth over $60 million today. No high-tech tools, no elaborate disguise, just a false signal, some elbow grease, and one very well-timed plan. The crew used a stolen railway signal to bring the train to a stop near Britigo Bridge in the countryside. Once halted, they jumped aboard and overpowered the driver using only fists and threats. No firearms were used. Then they uncoupled the high-value carriage, rolled it to a pre-planned spot under the bridge, and got to work. Using a human chain, the gang transferred 120 sacks of used banknotes into 2 waiting vehicles. It took about 30 minutes. Then they vanished into the foggy countryside and retreated to a rented farmhouse where they laid low counting money, cleaning up evidence and trying to stay quiet. The operation was shockingly smooth, and for a moment it seemed like they might actually get away with it. But what brought them down wasn't police brilliance, it was carelessness. They left behind fingerprints on a ketchup bottle and a Monopoly board. From there, investigators began to connect the dots. Over the following years, nearly all of the robbers were arrested and jailed, though a few managed to escape or vanish for decades. Ronnie Biggs, one of the most famous among them, became a global fugitive and was spotted living in Brazil years later, enjoying freedom with his face on newspaper front pages. The Great Train Robbery wasn't just about the money, it was about the style. It captured the public's imagination. These weren't gangsters in the streets. They were organized, oddly polite, and strangely likable. To this day, the heist feels like a classic crime caper pulled from a vintage film, except it really happened. It started as a plan to steal some quick cash. What the robbers found instead was 3 tons of gold bullion, and it changed everything. In 1983, a gang of armed men stormed the Brinksmat warehouse near Heathrow Airport in London. They expected to find around $3 million, where instead they stumbled onto a jackpot: gold, diamonds, and cash worth over $26 million. The inside man was a security guard who knew the layout and routine. He helped the gang get past the gates and into the vault area. Within minutes, they overpowered the staff, doused them in gasoline to force open the safe codes, and uncovered pallets stacked with gold bars. The plan shifted instantly. What was supposed to be a robbery became one of the most lucrative thefts in British history. But stealing that much gold is only half the job. The harder part? Getting rid of it. The gold was smelted down, mixed with copper to disguise its origin, and sold off in chunks, a process that pulled in dozens of middlemen and criminals over the next few years. Some of that gold, they say, may have even ended up in legitimate jewelry shops across Europe. The fallout was huge. Investigations stretched for decades. At least 2 people linked to the laundering operations were found dead under suspicious circumstances. And yet most of the gold was never recovered. Authorities believe it helped fund entire criminal empires and may still be circulating in the form of wedding rings and investment bars. As for the robbers, a few were caught and jailed. One of the key men behind the job, Mickey McAvoy, used his cut to live large, but it didn't last. He was tracked down, arrested, and imprisoned. Others vanished into the shadows. The Brinksmat robbery wasn't just a heist, it was the spark that ignited years of financial crime and underground wealth. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, but it left behind a gold trail that Britain is still chasing more than 40 years later. Before dawn broke over New York City in December 1978, A group of men carried out a job so clean, so shocking, and so well organized that it became legend. At JFK Airport, they broke into a Lufthansa cargo building and stole nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry, the largest cash theft in American history at the time. No alarms were triggered, no one saw them coming, and most of the money, it's still missing. The mastermind behind it was Jimmy Burke, a mob associate later made infamous through Goodfellas. He knew that Lufthansa shipments coming in from Germany carried unregistered American dollars used by international travelers. The money wasn't marked. It wasn't insured. And it was just sitting there in a vault. In the middle of the night, a crew of armed men entered the building with precision. They held workers at gunpoint, ordered them to lie on the floor, and forced one employee to open the vault. It took less than an hour. Then they disappeared into the darkness with sacks of cash and jewels. The whole thing ran like clockwork. What followed wasn't just a manhunt, it was a meltdown. In the months after the heist, nearly everyone connected to it started turning up dead. One by one, people vanished or were found under suspicious circumstances. Investigators believed Jimmy Burke had most of them silenced to avoid leaks. Despite massive FBI pressure, Burke himself was never convicted for the heist. He was eventually jailed on unrelated charges, and the mystery of what happened to the stolen fortune remains unsolved. It's believed much of the money was funneled into businesses, property, and black market deals that faded into the background over the years. The Lufthansa heist wasn't just a crime. It was a cultural moment whispered about in the streets, dramatized in film, and etched into the history of New York. A heist with military precision, mob ties, and a vanishing treasure that may still be out there. No explosions, no high-speed chases, just cold planning, flawless timing, and a robbery that continues to haunt airport security playbooks to this day.
Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, wasn't just another medieval ruler. He was a nightmare made flesh. Born in the 15th century as the Prince of Wallachia, he lived in a time of endless wars, betrayals, and bloodshed. But even in that brutal era, Vlad stood out for his unmatched cruelty. His favorite method of punishment was impalement. This wasn't a quick death. It was slow and designed to send a message. His enemies, and sometimes his own people, were skewered on wooden stakes and left to suffer for hours or even days. When the Ottoman Empire threatened his lands, Vlad didn't just fight back. He waged a campaign of psychological terror. Even his allies feared him. Stories spread of banquet halls where guests were served fine wine while bodies stood around them like grim decorations. But Vlad wasn't just ruthless in battle. He had no patience for crime or disloyalty in his own lands. It's said that he once left a golden cup in a public square, daring anyone to steal it. No one did. His punishments were too severe, his presence too terrifying. Many claim that his extreme brutality kept order, but at what cost? His reign left a legacy of fear so deep that centuries later, he became the inspiration for the world's most famous vampire, Count Dracula. The real horror of Vlad the Impaler wasn't in supernatural myths. It was in the very real, very human terror he inflicted upon the world. If Vlad the Impaler ruled with fear, Leopold II of Belgium ruled with greed, an insatiable hunger for power and wealth that came at a horrifying cost. Unlike medieval warlords, Leopold didn't need a sword to spill blood. His weapon was an empire, and his battlefield was the Congo. Under the guise of civilizing Africa, he turned an entire nation into his personal slave camp. The vast jungles of the Congo were rich in rubber, a resource the world desperately wanted. Leopold made sure to exploit every drop of it, but he didn't rely on willing workers. He built a system of forced labor, where those who didn't meet quotas paid with their lives. People were beaten, mutilated, or left to waste away. Whole villages were wiped out for resisting. The numbers are staggering. It's estimated that millions perished under his rule, though the exact toll may never be known. And the worst part? This wasn't done by some shadowy force operating in secret. Leopold presented himself as a philanthropist, a noble ruler bringing progress to Africa. Meanwhile, he squeezed the land dry, turning suffering into profit. Reports of his brutality eventually spread, forcing Belgium to strip him of control, but by then, the damage was done. Leopold's cruelty was wrapped in deception, a king, a conqueror, and a man who stained history with suffering, all without ever setting foot in the blood-soaked lands he ruled from afar. The greed that fueled Leopold's empire was monstrous, but at least he kept his victims at a distance. Marianne Cotton took a much more personal approach. She didn't need armies, whips, or chains to destroy lives, just a quiet cup of tea and a deadly dose of arsenic. In the industrial towns of 19th century England, cotton moved through life like a specter, leaving behind a chilling pattern of misfortune. Man after man, friend after friend, they all seemed to die under mysterious circumstances: fevers, stomach pains, sudden collapses. At first no one questioned it. Disease was common, life was harsh, and tragedy struck often, but not this often. Cotton's secret was both simple and terrifying. She poisoned those closest to her and collected their insurance payouts. Over the years, her crimes stacked up until suspicion finally caught up with her. When authorities exhumed one of her victims, the truth became undeniable. Arsenic was present in lethal amounts. She was arrested, tried, and sentenced to hang. But even at the gallows she remained eerily composed, as if death itself meant nothing to her. Unlike Leopold, who hid his cruelty behind a throne, Cotton carried hers in her pocket. A quiet killer, blending into everyday life, showing that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't rulers or warlords. They're the ones sitting right next to you. Some murder for power, some murder for profit. H.H. Holmes? He murdered for the sheer thrill of it. If Marianne Cotton lurked in the shadows, Holmes built a stage for his horror, a twisted playground disguised as a hotel. Chicago in the late 19th century was booming, filled with dreamers and travelers looking for opportunity. Holmes saw opportunity too, but his was far darker. He designed what became known as the Murder Castle, a building filled with hidden chambers, soundproof rooms, trapdoors, and corridors that led nowhere. Some doors locked only from the outside, others opened into sheer drops. Guests checked in, but many never checked out. Holmes was no mindless killer. He was calculated, charming, and convincing. He posed as a respectable doctor, luring victims into his web with promises of work, lodging, or even love. Once inside, they were at his mercy. Some were locked away, others were experimented on, and many were never seen again. When he was finally caught, the scope of his crime shocked the world. He confessed to dozens of murders, though the true count remains unknown. What is known is that Holmes turned murder into a masterpiece of deception. A castle, a killer, and a legacy that cemented him as one of America's most notorious criminals. Holmes built an empire of fear, one brick, one corridor, one victim at a time. H.H. Holmes built a house of horrors, but Jim Jones built something even worse, a community that walked willingly into its own destruction. At first he didn't seem like a monster. He was a preacher, a man of charisma, promising equality, justice, and salvation. His church, the People's Temple, attracted thousands, drawing in those who felt abandoned by society. But beneath the sermons and the talk of utopia, Jones was a master manipulator, tightening his grip on his followers until they had nowhere else to turn. When the outside world began questioning his church, Jones led his flock deep into the jungles of Guyana, far from prying eyes. There, in a settlement called Jonestown, his control became absolute. He dictated every aspect of his followers' lives, turning paradise into a prison. The breaking point came in November 1978. When government officials arrived to investigate, Jones knew his time was up. Instead of surrendering, he commanded his people to drink cyanide-laced punch, sealing their fate. Over 900 died that day, their bodies sprawled across the jungle floor in a chilling scene of mass obedience. Jones convinced his victims to surrender their lives willingly, not through force, but through belief. A preacher, a prophet, and a man who proved that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a gun or a knife, it's a voice. Jim Jones led his followers to death, but Isabella of Castile forced thousands into a different kind of suffering, one marked by fear, torture, and exile. She was a queen with a vision, a ruler determined to unite Spain under one faith. But to do that, she needed an enemy, and so she created one. Under her rule, the Spanish Inquisition became a machine of terror, rooting out anyone who didn't fit her idea of religious purity. Jews, Muslims, suspected heretics, no one was safe. The methods were brutal. Those accused of heresy were dragged before inquisitors, forced to confess under unimaginable pressure. Some were imprisoned, some were tortured, and many were sentenced to death. Public executions became spectacles designed to send a message: defy the church and you'll burn for it. But Isabella wasn't just feared, she was powerful. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon united Spain, and her sponsorship of Christopher Columbus changed history forever. Yet beneath the titles and the legacy, she remains one of history's most ruthless rulers. If Isabella used faith to justify her rule, Pol Pot used ideology to justify mass murder. He didn't just want power, he wanted to rebuild Cambodia from the ground up, erasing everything that came before him. In 1975, when his Khmer Rouge forces seized control, he began one of the most brutal social experiments in history. Cities were emptied, intellectuals were targeted, and anyone suspected of opposing his vision was dealt with swiftly. His goal was to turn Cambodia into a pure agrarian society, but the price was unthinkable. Millions were forced into labor camps where starvation and disease ran rampant. Education, medicine, and even family ties were seen as threats to the regime. Those who wore glasses, spoke foreign languages, or simply appeared too intelligent, often disappeared. The fields of Cambodia became mass graves, the land soaked in the blood of its own people. By the time Pol Pot was removed from power, nearly a quarter of the country's population was gone. Pol Pot hid deep in the jungles, watching his country crumble under the weight of his own brutality, a leader who promised revolution but delivered nothing but death. If Pol Pot slaughtered his own people, Genghis Khan slaughtered entire civilizations. He wasn't just a warlord, he was a force of nature sweeping across Asia and Europe like a storm, leaving nothing but ruin in his wake. Born in the harsh Mongolian steppes, Genghis Khan clawed his way to power through blood and betrayal. But once he united the Mongol tribes, his hunger for conquest became unstoppable. Kingdoms crumbled before him, cities vanished, and populations were wiped out. His tactics were brutal but effective. Surrender and you might be spared. Resist and your entire city would be reduced to ashes. The Mongol armies were unlike anything the world had seen, fast, ruthless, and merciless. They turned rivers red with blood, stacked the skulls of their enemies into pyramids, and erased entire cultures from history. It's estimated that tens of millions perished under his rule, making him one of the deadliest conquerors of all time. And yet, for all his brutality, he was also a ruler who built one of the largest empires in history, promoting trade and communication across continents. Genghis Khan's terror built an empire that shaped the modern world. A warlord, a legend, and a man who turned entire civilizations into nothing more than whispers of the past. Genghis Khan shattered empires with brute force. Hernan Cortés, on the other hand, destroyed one with cunning, betrayal, and a hunger for gold that knew no limits. When he arrived in Mexico in 1519, the Aztecs were the most powerful civilization in the region. Their grand capital, Tenochtitlan, was larger than most European cities, filled with towering temples, bustling markets, and a thriving society. But Cortés saw none of that. He saw an empire ripe for the taking. With just a few hundred soldiers, he set out to do the impossible, topple an entire civilization. He didn't do it alone. Cortés manipulated rival tribes, turning them against the Aztecs, spreading disease, and using deception to weaken their defenses. He even managed to capture their emperor Montezuma, reducing the mighty ruler to a puppet. When the Aztecs finally fought back, their resistance was valiant but futile. Outnumbered and outgunned, they fell, their once great empire reduced to rubble. Unlike Genghis Khan, who built an empire from nothing, Cortés tore one down and handed its riches to Spain. A conquistador, a schemer, and a man whose thirst for power led to the destruction of an entire civilization. Hernan Cortés killed for conquest. Elizabeth Bathory killed for pleasure. A noble woman of 16th century Hungary, she lived in luxury, surrounded by wealth, servants, and influence. But behind the castle walls, something far more sinister was taking place. Over the years, whispers spread of girls disappearing, servants vanishing, and horrific screams echoing from within her chambers. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. Bathory, it was said, had an insatiable appetite for cruelty. She would lure young women to her castle, only for them to never leave. Rumors swirled that she believed their suffering would preserve her beauty, that she found pleasure in their pain. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. Witnesses came forward, the castle was raided, and the horrors within were exposed. The noblewoman, once untouchable, was sentenced to life imprisonment, locked away in her own home, where she died years later. Idi Amin turned an entire country into his personal horror show. When he seized power in Uganda in 1971, the world saw him as a charismatic military leader. He promised stability, strength, and a bright future. Instead, he delivered a reign of terror marked by violence, paranoia, and absolute control. The once promising ruler quickly became one of the most ruthless dictators in modern history. He didn't just remove his enemies, he made them disappear. Political opponents, military officers, and anyone who dared challenge him were never seen again. Under Amin's rule, Uganda became a country gripped by fear. Entire villages were wiped out, professionals fled in droves, and executions became a routine spectacle. His cruelty knew no limits. Those who once trusted him were betrayed, those who served him lived in terror, and those who stood against him paid the ultimate price. By the time he was overthrown in 1979, hundreds of thousands had perished, leaving Uganda scarred and broken. Amin lived out his final years in luxury, unpunished for the horrors he unleashed. Idi Amin ruled with an army, but Pedro Lopez needed no soldiers, just his own twisted mind. If Amin was a dictator of death, Lopez was a phantom of terror, a predator who slipped through the cracks of justice over and over again. Born into poverty and hardship, he turned to crime early, but his violence escalated in ways few could comprehend. Roaming across Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru, he preyed on the vulnerable, leaving a trail of horror in his wake. His methods were calculated, his actions chilling, and his crimes seemingly endless. But unlike other killers, Lopez didn't hide in the shadows forever. He was caught, arrested, and confessed to an astonishing number of murders. The authorities were horrified, but in a twist almost as disturbing as his crimes, he was released after serving time. The world lost track of him, and to this day no one knows where he is, or if he ever stopped. While Amin's rule was brought down by force, Lopez simply faded away, a monster who walked free, a nightmare without an ending. Pedro Lopez struck fear into individuals. Shiro Ishii turned suffering into an industry. Unlike common criminals, Ishii hid behind science, presenting himself as a doctor, a researcher, a man of progress. But his experiments had nothing to do with healing. As the head of Japan's infamous Unit 731 during World War II, he ran one of the most grotesque operations in history. While the world focused on battles and politics, deep in the shadows of Manchuria, Ishii and his team carried out experiments so horrific they barely seem real. Men, women, even the sick and wounded, no one was spared. His work was meant to test biological weapons, to push the limits of human endurance, to turn cruelty into knowledge. But there was no medical breakthrough, no noble cause, only suffering, inflicted under the guise of science. And when the war ended, did Ishii face justice? No. In a sickening deal, he was granted freedom in exchange for his research, living out his days untouched. Ishii's crimes were known, yet he escaped the fate he deserved. A doctor, a war criminal, and a man who used medicine as a tool for horror. Shiro Ishii tortured in secrecy. Maximilien Robespierre did it in broad daylight, turning executions into national events. He started as an idealist, a man who believed in justice, in liberty, in the power of the people. But revolutions are unpredictable, and power twists even the noblest intentions. When Robespierre took control of the French Revolution, he didn't just go after tyrants, he became one. His weapon of choice wasn't a gun, a prison, or an army. It was the guillotine. Under his rule, the reign of terror swept across France. Anyone suspected of disloyalty, of questioning the revolution, of not being revolutionary enough, off with their heads. Nobles, commoners, even former allies met their end in the public squares of Paris. The irony? The man who orchestrated the bloodshed met the same fate. When the tide turned against him, Robespierre was dragged to the guillotine, his own terror cutting him down. Robespierre's downfall came fast. Nero's was a slow-burning catastrophe. Rome had seen mad emperors before, but none quite like him. He wasn't just cruel, he was theatrical about it. He wanted to be a god, an artist, a ruler loved by all. But the more he craved admiration, the more his paranoia consumed him. Suspected traitors vanished, family members died by his command. The Senate feared him, the people despised him, and Rome itself trembled under his rule. Then came the fire. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD destroyed much of the city, and while history debates whether Nero had a hand in it, one thing is clear, he used it to his advantage. While the flames still smoldered, he found a scapegoat, unleashing brutal persecution on the Christians. His cruelty had no limits, his rule no stability. Eventually, the empire turned against him, and Nero found himself without allies, without power, without a future. With nowhere left to run, he took his own life, bringing his reign to an end. Tomás de Torquemada turned Spain into a land of fear. His name became synonymous with the Spanish Inquisition, a reign of terror where belief could mean the difference between life and death. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't a king. He was a priest, a man of faith who believed he was carrying out divine justice. But his justice was anything but holy. With the full support of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, he orchestrated a campaign to root out heretics, forcing countless people to choose between conversion, exile, or death. The methods were as ruthless as they were systematic. Trials were rigged, Confessions were extracted under unbearable conditions, and sentences were carried out in grand public spectacles meant to instill obedience through fear. Thousands perished, their only crime being born into the wrong faith or holding beliefs that didn't align with the church. Torquemada didn't wield a sword, but his words and orders were more lethal than any weapon. Torquemada's work lasted long after he was gone, shaping Spain's history with the blood of its own people. If Torquemada ruled through doctrine, Timur ruled through devastation. Some conquerors expand their empires, others build civilizations. Timur, he built nightmares. Rising from the Central Asian steppes in the 14th century, he carved out an empire through sheer terror. He saw no value in diplomacy, no need for mercy, only absolute domination. When Timur's army descended on a city, surrender was the only way to avoid annihilation, and even then, survival wasn't guaranteed. His signature move was as gruesome as it was unforgettable. After conquering a city, he ordered the construction of pyramids made from skulls of his enemies. Tens of thousands perished, their remains turned into monuments of his cruelty. Entire regions were depopulated, their cultures erased, their histories rewritten in blood. Timur's horrors played out on battlefields, but Delphine Lalauries unfolded in the candlelit halls of her New Orleans mansion. On the surface, she was a respected socialite, a woman of wealth and status. But behind closed doors, she indulged in cruelty so extreme that even her fellow aristocrats recoiled in horror. The whispers began as rumors, servants disappearing, strange noises echoing from the house, unsettling glimpses of suffering behind locked doors. But no one dared to investigate. That changed when a fire broke out at her mansion in 1834. Rescuers rushed inside and uncovered the truth, an attic filled with victims, their bodies bearing the marks of unspeakable torment. The city erupted in outrage, but before justice could be served, Lalaurie vanished, fleeing into the unknown. Some say she died in exile, others claim she returned under a false identity. Delphine Lalaurie's cruelty was confined to a single mansion. Rafael Trujillo's terror stretched across an entire nation. For over 30 years he ruled the Dominican Republic with an iron grip, transforming it into his personal kingdom of fear. Every street, every town, every institution bore his influence. His face was plastered on walls, his name spoken with both reverence and terror. And those who opposed him, they simply vanished. Trujillo didn't just rule, he controlled every aspect of life. Dissent was crushed, executions were routine, and paranoia ran deep. He even ordered one of the deadliest massacres in Caribbean history, targeting thousands of Haitian immigrants in a brutal act of ethnic cleansing. His reign was marked by excess, cruelty, and an obsession with his own power. But like many dictators before him, his grip on power eventually slipped. In 1961, his enemies struck back, ambushing him in a hail of gunfire. Trujillo destroyed lives with violence. Thomas Midgley Jr. did it with science. He wasn't a conqueror, a killer, or a tyrant. He was an inventor, a man who believed he was making the world better. But his creations did the exact opposite. First came leaded gasoline, a breakthrough that made cars run smoother, but at the cost of unleashing toxic lead into the air. Generations suffered the effects, their health silently deteriorating. But Midgley wasn't finished. His next great invention? Chlorofluorocarbons, chemicals that would go on to rip a hole in the Earth's ozone layer. Unlike Trujillo, who knew the damage he was causing, Midgley never seemed to grasp the destruction he left behind. He wasn't a war criminal, yet his inventions caused more harm than most dictators. Ironically, his own mind was his downfall. After contracting polio, he designed an elaborate system of pulleys to help him move. That very invention ended his life, strangling him in a tragic twist of fate. A scientist, an innovator, and a man whose legacy is not one of progress, but of unintended disaster. A young man sprints through an airport, glancing over his shoulder as if something, or someone, is chasing him. His movements are frantic. He dashes past travelers, pushing through the doors, into the open air, and then, he's gone. This is the last confirmed sighting of Lars Mittank, a 28-year-old German tourist who disappeared without a trace in July 2014. It all started as a fun vacation with friends. The group traveled to Bulgaria, enjoying the sun and beaches of Golden Sands. Everything was going well until a minor argument at a bar led to Lars getting injured. A blow to the head left him with a ruptured eardrum, and a doctor advised him not to fly until it healed. His friends had already booked their return flights, but Lars made the decision to stay behind alone. It was a choice that would lead to one of the most unsettling disappearances in recent history. Over the next few days, Lars's behavior took a bizarre turn. He called his mother, whispering that he was being followed. He sent strange messages, warning that she shouldn't trust anyone. His paranoia grew. He switched hotels, saying he didn't feel safe. He was last seen at Varna Airport, where he had booked a flight home. At first everything seemed normal. He checked in, sat in the waiting area. But then, suddenly, something spooked him. Surveillance footage shows Lars standing in the terminal, looking around nervously. Then without warning, he takes off running. He sprints through the airport, past security, past travelers, past everyone, then out the doors, onto an open field. Witnesses saw him disappearing into the trees, heading toward a vast, empty landscape. No one ever saw him again. Search efforts turned up nothing, no signs of struggle, no belongings left behind. His mother pleaded for answers, but none came. A young woman drives down a dark, snowy road in rural New Hampshire. Her car swerves off the highway, crashing into a snowbank. A passerby offers help, but she refuses. By the time authorities arrive, she's gone. No footprints leading away, no sign of struggle, just an empty vehicle and an eerie silence. This is the last confirmed moment of Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student who vanished on February 9, 2004. Earlier that day, Maura left her dorm in Massachusetts, emailing her professors that she needed time off due to a family emergency. There was no emergency. Instead, she withdrew cash, bought alcohol, and set off in her car, heading north. No one knows why. The crash on Route 112 was minor. A local resident saw her standing outside the vehicle, appearing uninjured, and offered assistance. She declined, saying she had called AAA. That wasn't true. There was no call. Minutes later, she disappeared. Theories have swirled ever since. Some say she ran away, others believe she met with foul play. Search dogs lost her scent in the middle of the road as if she had been picked up by someone. Her credit cards, phone, and bank accounts were never used again. To this day, the mystery lingers, haunting investigators and internet sleuths alike. Where did Maura go? And did she mean to disappear? Or did someone make that decision for her? 3 years later, another disappearance, another set of unanswerable questions, but this time, it was a 14-year-old boy who walked straight into the unknown. September 14, 2007, started like any other day. Andrew Gosden got up, dressed in his school uniform, and left home. But instead of heading to school, he withdrew money from his bank account, changed into casual clothes, and bought a one-way train ticket to London. The last confirmed image of him was captured by CCTV at King's Cross Station. After that, nothing. He was never seen again. Andrew was quiet, intelligent, and preferred spending time at home rather than socializing. He had no history of running away, no signs of distress. His family was blindsided. Why would he travel to London alone with no phone, no extra clothes, and no plan to return? His bank account was never touched again. His bedroom remained untouched, as if he had stepped out for a moment and would be right back. Years passed, with only fragments of possible clues. A call to the police in 2018 suggested Andrew might still be alive, but the lead went cold. No confirmed sightings, no answers. Like Maura, Andrew vanished in an instant, leaving behind only speculation and a single haunting image. Him, standing in a train station on the verge of disappearing forever. Not all disappearances happen in the shadows. Some unfold in broad daylight, in places where civilization fades and the unknown takes over. That's exactly what happened to Michael Rockefeller. In 1961, the 23-year-old heir to one of the richest families in the world set off on an expedition to New Guinea, drawn to the remote Asmat tribes and their art. He was adventurous, curious, and determined to go further than anyone before him. But on November 17th, his journey came to a sudden, unexplained halt. His boat capsized off the coast, leaving him and his companions stranded in the water. The other man stayed with the wreckage, but Michael made a fateful decision. He took off his clothes, strapped on some makeshift floats, and swam toward shore. It was the last time anyone ever saw him. The official story is that he drowned, but people who knew the area weren't convinced. The Asmat people had a history of ritual revenge against outsiders. Some believe Michael made it to land but didn't survive what came next. Others think he lived, taken in by the tribe, forced into a life no one would ever discover. His father, Nelson Rockefeller, launched one of the most expensive searches in history, but no trace of Michael was ever found. A powerful name, endless resources, yet still vanished, as if he had never existed at all. Decades after Michael Rockefeller disappeared, another mystery unfolded. Not in a jungle, but 35,000 feet above the ocean. A plane, a routine flight, and 239 people who simply ceased to exist. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, heading for Beijing. It was a clear night, nothing unusual. Then, less than an hour after takeoff, the plane veered off course. Radar contact was lost. No distress signals, no emergency calls, just silence. What followed was one of the largest search operations in history. Satellite data suggested the plane had made a sharp turn, flying thousands of miles in the wrong direction before vanishing somewhere over the Indian Ocean. Debris washed up on distant shores, but the aircraft itself was never found. What happened? Some believe it was mechanical failure. Others suggest human intervention. Theories range from hijacking to deliberate sabotage, but there is no proof, just endless speculation. And then, there are the eerie details. The pilot's flight simulator, which had a route eerily similar to the one MH370 took. The missing cargo, the unanswered calls. Like Michael Rockefeller, MH370 should have left something behind. Wreckage, a signal, a reason. Instead, it became a modern ghost story. One of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time, with no ending in sight. A packed bar, loud music, and a medical student celebrating the start of spring break. It was just another night out in Columbus, Ohio, until Brian Schaffer stepped into a bar and never stepped out. On April 1, 2006, the 27-year-old went out with friends to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular college hangout. Surveillance footage shows him standing near the entrance, talking and laughing. A little after 2 a.m., as the bar was closing, cameras caught him moving toward the exit. But then, nothing. Brian never left the building, at least not on camera. His phone was never used again. His apartment remained untouched. His car was still parked outside. A security camera covered every way out, yet there was no sign of him leaving. The only blind spot? A back exit leading to a construction site. Could he have slipped through unseen, fallen, met with foul play? Theories spiraled. Some thought he staged his own disappearance, but he had no known reason to leave his life behind. Others believed he was harmed and somehow removed from the bar without a trace. His girlfriend kept calling his phone for months, and once, just once, it actually rang before cutting off. Was it a glitch? Or was Brian still out there somewhere? What makes this case even stranger is what happened afterward. His mother, devastated, passed away unexpectedly. At her funeral, a candlelight vigil was held for Brian. As the service ended, his father released a balloon with a message for him. Just a few weeks later, a freak accident took his father's life too. Now there's no one left in Brian's immediate family to keep searching, but the question remains, how does someone vanish from a crowded bar with cameras at every door? Brian Schaffer disappeared without a trace, but sometimes a disappearance leaves behind fragments, just enough to be disturbing. That's exactly what happened in 2014 when two Dutch tourists, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, set off on a hike in Panama and never returned. The two friends had been staying in the town of Boquete, planning to explore the surrounding jungle. On April 1st, they set out on the Pianista Trail, a popular route for travelers. But something went terribly wrong. They didn't show up for a scheduled tour the next day. Calls went unanswered. Their families, thousands of miles away, knew something wasn't right. A massive search was launched, but it wasn't until 10 weeks later that a breakthrough came. Lisanne's backpack was found on a riverbank. Inside, their phones, a camera, and cash. The camera held something chilling. Photos, taken deep in the jungle, long after the women should have been lost. Some showed them smiling on the trail, seemingly unaware of any danger. But then, there were the nighttime photos, blurry random images of rocks, treetops, and the darkness beyond. Then more remains were discovered, bone fragments. But how did they die? The jungle is dangerous, but the state of their bones suggested something more. No scratches, no signs of an animal attack. Some were bleached, as if they had been deliberately treated. Theories range from a tragic accident to something more sinister. Did they get lost? Or did they meet someone in the jungle who didn't want them to leave? The photos, the incomplete evidence, the unsettling details. It's a mystery that feels like it should have an answer, yet all it leaves behind is an eerie sense of unfinished business. Some disappearances are immediate, a person vanishes in the blink of an eye. Others unravel slowly, piece by piece, growing stranger at every turn. Zeb Quinn's case is the second kind. The 18-year-old was last seen on January 2, 2000 in Asheville, North Carolina. But his disappearance wasn't just about him. It involved a suspicious friend, an abandoned car, and a series of bizarre clues that made no sense. That evening, Zeb finished his shift at a local Walmart and made plans with a co-worker, Robert Jason Owens, to check out a car he was interested in buying. They drove separately, with Zeb following behind. But along the way, something strange happened. Zeb suddenly flashed his headlights, signaling Owens to pull over. When they stopped, he seemed agitated. He had just received a message on his pager. He told Owens he needed to return the call and sped off, promising to meet back up later. He never did. 2 days later, his car turned up in a parking lot outside a restaurant. Inside were several strange items: a pair of lips drawn in lipstick on the rear windshield, a hotel key, and a live puppy. None of it belonged to Zeb. His family and friends had no idea what any of it meant. Even stranger, Owens, the last person to see him, later claimed that Zeb returned hours after their initial meetup, smacking his own face in distress before speeding off again. For years, there were no answers. Then, in 2015, Owens was arrested for an unrelated case, taking the life of a couple and disposing of their bodies. During the investigation, new evidence linked him to Zeb's disappearance. But by then, 15 years had passed, and Zeb's fate remained a mystery. His body was never found. His family still doesn't know what happened that night. The pager message, the abandoned car, the chilling connection to Owens. It's a story filled with clues yet no clear solution. What really happened to Zeb Quinn? And why does it feel like the truth is just out of reach? A pilot and her navigator, a daring flight around the world, and then, nothing. No distress call, no wreckage, just a plane that vanished mid-air, leaving behind one of the most enduring mysteries of all time. On July 2, 1937, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan took off from Lae, Papua New Guinea, in their Lockheed Electra, heading toward a tiny island in the Pacific, Howland Island. It was supposed to be a routine leg of their journey, one of the last before completing their historic flight. But as they approached their destination, radio transmissions grew frantic. Earhart's voice crackled over the airwaves, saying she was running low on fuel. Then, silence. Search teams scoured the ocean, but no trace of them or the plane was ever found. Theories multiplied. Some say they crashed into the sea and sank. Others believe they survived, stranded on a remote island, waiting for a rescue that never came. Decades later, skeletal remains were found on Nikumaroro, a desolate atoll that Earhart might have reached. The bones vanished before they could be properly studied, adding yet another layer of mystery. With no definitive answers, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan became legend. A pioneering woman lost to the sky, a navigator who mapped endless routes only to vanish without one, and a flight that should have ended in triumph but instead left behind only questions. Amelia Earhart disappeared while flying over the ocean, but nearly 4 decades later, another traveler set off into the unknown, this time driving straight into the desert. His name was Jim Sullivan, a musician with an eerie connection to his own disappearance. In 1975, Sullivan packed up his car and left Los Angeles, heading east toward Nashville, hoping for a fresh start in his music career. He never made it. His car was found abandoned on a remote dirt road in New Mexico. Inside were his belongings, his guitar, clothes, even his wallet, but Sullivan was gone. What makes his case even stranger is his 1969 album, UFO, which was filled with lyrics about being lost in the desert, being taken by something unseen. Some believe he wandered off and succumbed to the elements. Others think he was running from something or someone. A few even suggest he was taken, just like his music described. No footprints, no remains, no clues. Just an empty car, a silent desert, and a man who seemed to have vanished right into thin air. A 15-year-old girl hurries out of music class, a black and white flute case tucked under her arm. She stops to make a quick phone call, then heads toward her usual bus stop. But she never makes it home. In the middle of Vatican City, one of the most secure places on Earth, Emanuela Orlandi vanished without a trace. It was June 22, 1983. Emanuela was the daughter of a Vatican employee, meaning she lived inside the walls of the Holy See. Her disappearance was dismissed at first, just a teenager running late, but when night fell and there was still no sign of her, panic set in. Then the phone calls started. A man with a foreign accent claimed he had Emanuela. He demanded the release of a high-profile prisoner in exchange for her return. Other calls followed, each more cryptic than the last. Some callers hinted at Vatican secrets, others pointed toward organized crime. As years passed, the mystery deepened. A gravesite was dug up inside the Vatican in 2019 after an anonymous tip claimed her body was there. The tomb was empty. Theories have only grown. Was she taken for ransom? Did she witness something she shouldn't have? Or was it something even more unthinkable? Despite countless investigations, no real answers have surfaced. Emanuela Orlandi remains one of the most puzzling missing person cases in modern history. A girl who walked out of a lesson and disappeared into the heart of one of the most powerful places in the world. A voice on the phone, the sound of footsteps, then suddenly, nothing. That was the last anyone ever heard from 19-year-old Brandon Swanson before he disappeared into the darkness of rural Minnesota. It was the night of May 14, 2008. Brandon had been celebrating the end of his college semester with friends. Around midnight, he left a party and started driving home. But something went wrong. His car veered off a gravel road and got stuck in a ditch. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, he called his parents for help. He told them he wasn't hurt, just annoyed. They agreed to pick him up, but when they arrived at the spot he described, there was no car, no Brandon. Frustrated and confused, Brandon stayed on the phone, insisting he could see distant lights. Maybe a town, maybe a farm. He decided to start walking toward them. His parents drove around trying to find him, all while keeping him on the line. For 47 minutes they talked, listening to his footsteps on the gravel, his breathing, his occasional muttering about the landscape. Then, out of nowhere he said, "Oh shh," and the call ended. No one knows what happened in that moment. His phone went silent. His parents redialed over and over, no answer. Searches spanned miles, helicopters scanned the fields, search dogs tracked his scent, but only up to a point, as if he had just vanished. His car was eventually found, but miles away from where he had said he was. No remains, no evidence, no clear explanation. Was it an accident? Did someone find him? Or did he walk straight into something no one saw coming? The open Minnesota fields hold a secret, and somewhere out there, so does Brandon Swanson's fate. A cruise ship, a night of music and dancing, and a missing passenger who was never found. The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley is one of the most chilling mysteries to ever take place at sea. In March 1998, Amy, a 23-year-old from Virginia, was vacationing with her family aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. She spent the evening at the ship's nightclub hanging out with the band. By early morning she was seen lounging on the cabin's balcony. Then, she was gone. Her family woke up to an empty room. At first they thought she had gone to the deck to relax, but as time passed, panic set in. The ship's crew suggested she had fallen overboard, but Amy was a trained swimmer and there were no signs of struggle. Her parents begged the captain not to dock until a full search was done, but the ship continued its route. By the time authorities got involved, hours had been lost. Then came the sightings. Passengers claimed they had seen Amy on the ship after she was reported missing. Later, tourists reported seeing a woman resembling her in the Caribbean, on a beach, in a brothel, even whispering "help me" before vanishing into a crowd. A photograph surfaced years later showing a woman who looked eerily like Amy, dressed in revealing clothes, staring blankly at the camera. Did Amy fall victim to trafficking? Was she taken off the ship before anyone noticed? The ocean holds its secrets, but so do the people who may have seen Amy Bradley long after she was declared missing. A socialite steps out onto the busy streets of Manhattan, dressed in fine clothes, carrying a book she just purchased. She walks through Central Park, blending into the crowd, and then, she's gone. No struggle, no screams, no evidence of foul play. Just a young woman who vanished in broad daylight, leaving behind one of the oldest and most baffling missing person cases in history. Dorothy Arnold was 25 years old, wealthy, well-educated, and the daughter of a powerful New York family. On December 12, 1910, she left her home for a shopping trip. She bought chocolates, browsed a bookstore, and was last seen around 2 p.m. near Fifth Avenue. After that, nothing. When she didn't return home, her family assumed she was with friends. But as hours turned into days, their concern turned to dread. Her parents, afraid of scandal, didn't call the police right away. Instead, they hired private detectives who scoured hospitals, morgues, and train stations. No sign of Dorothy. Rumors exploded. Some believed she had run away to start a new life. Others thought she had fallen victim to a crime, possibly even someone she knew. There were whispers of a secret relationship, an unwanted pregnancy, even a tragic accident that someone covered up. For years, supposed sightings surfaced. Dorothy in Europe, Dorothy in an asylum, Dorothy taken by someone powerful enough to erase all traces of her, but none were ever confirmed. Her case faded into legend, a reminder that even in a crowded city, a person can disappear without a single clue. That's about it. What do you think happens to the missing people? Share your thoughts in the comments. For more useful information, watch other videos.